All right, everyone, I'd like to lend a little bit more analytic credence to what Paul Joseph Watson has pointed out, which is, hey, the new right is basically the new counterculture, the cool kids. That's actually more true than I think even he realizes. You see, if the average group of, like, so-called far-lefters, but they're really just censorship-happy authoritarians, they're easily offended. If they went back to, like, the Temperance era, they would have been like the three-layer dress-wearing, pearl-clutching moralist housewives club that we're talking about. Oh, our men need to shave and stop chewing tobacco, no more alcohol, go to church, and be really, really, like, moralistic and religious. That's what they would have had as a counterpart. It's not, it is kind of by design that the suffragette movement was tied in with that, so I'll just point that out there. They're moralists. They're really more like Bible thumpers from the 80s or 90s than they are a counterculture. And I think if they were in the 60s, they would have called John Lennon a racist. They would have said Jimi Hendrix was a sexist. Janis Joplin was a homophobic, like, sellout, like she didn't stand for women's liberation enough, and she lets men objectify her by coming out shirtless onto stage and stuff. Oh, that dude from The Doors? Oh, well, he's totally degenerated because he sleeps around with women or something like that. They would have said all these things. You know, it's like John Lennon, before dying, he was slowly losing favor in parts of the left. I think he worried about their militancy more than anything else. He's worried, oh, they're going to become like the next authoritarians, and he's right. It became a bunch of yuppies, honestly. A lot of them switched over, voted for Reagan, became moralistic, raised Generation X, and then started clutching their own pearls because of Jackass and stuff like that. And this happens over and over and over. It will never stop. It will never end. There will always be a few voices, like myself, who just say, well, I don't want censorship at all. I want things to be exciting and edgy. I don't care whether it's coming from the left or from the right, as long as it's exciting. Something different that we haven't fucking heard 1,000 times before. Something talented, something that gets people thinking, something that's got something intelligent to say. You don't have to agree with it. It's like, I'll listen to Rage Against the Machine, ultimately. Anarcho, commie, or socialist, whatever sort of stuff. But it's still good music. And at the time, it was still very, very edgy. You know, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. It's some good stuff. It doesn't matter that it came from sort of a leftist ideology. It was basically an anti-authoritarian ideology at its core. Hey, yeah, the government's abusive, the cops are being abusive, society's, you know, retarded, and stuff like that. It came from the left, but it had that honest message. Now you see that coming from the right. And then all of the people that were edgy from the last generation, they stand against it and say how terrible it is. Like, some old hippie dude at some point is going to come wandering out of the mountains and take a look at the current political situation after spending 10, 15 years doing nothing but mushrooms out there. Just totally blow a gasket. It'll be like the Truth from San Andreas or something like that. You know, the hippie dude there. You have to help burn his pot farm when the FBI or whatever it is comes, and CJ gets all high and the camera gets all wonky. By the way, that was like the greatest mission ever in a GTA game. Yeah, it's hippie dude's gonna come wandering out of the mountains and say, wow, I used to think that the left was cool, but now they're just totally fucking lame. They're a bunch of squares. They don't know what's going on in the world. They lost their youthful rebellion. They lost the inclination to debate people over what they believed in. Now they simply want to throttle all debate and shut people up. We've gone from the left maybe 5, 6 years ago. They were saying, well, ultimately we want people who we disagree with to speak freely because we're convinced that they're wrong and it gives us a chance to debate them. And that drove what they saw as social progress. Look, all the social progress that the left saw over the last decade or perceives of having happened was the result of debate largely online, decentralized, and not intruded into by governments. In a way, I think almost the current reign of censorship is at least in large part to dumb down social progress in leftist land, because it takes it out of the realm of something decentralized and grassroots and therefore cool, and puts it squarely in the camp of corporations and government, which are never cool. Government has never been cool. Never. Look throughout our history. Has there ever been a time when, oh wow, government is just so awesome. Wow, it's so hip. No, it's either ignored or it's reviled for the most part. It's seen as a necessary evil. At the best of times, as far as people's reception of government control goes, it's during a time of great stress. We're in a world war or something, so people just say, okay, well, it's time to buckle down and, okay, we'll support Uncle Sam on this war venture and buy some bonds and stuff. Maybe listen to some more propaganda. But even then, it's not like, oh, government is exciting. It's more like, oh, shit, we're going to die if we don't support our country. And so, you know, we got to put at least a little trust in our representation, and hopefully it won't screw us over and waste time. And that's what the left has devolved into. Moralists. They've become what they fought 10 years ago. They now ask the government to save them from these evil Nazis. Yeah, like the government ever saved you from the people you were fighting against 10 years ago. No, it never happened, and it's never going to happen. They're going to make your abuse more complete. They'll turn on you at some point in the near future. You wait maybe a year, 2 years. You watch what happens. A lot of that censorship, it's going to be aimed at progressives and socialists and people like that. They're going to come after you next. It's not going to be the right wing. Once they realize they can't actively suppress it very easily and they flee to their own platforms or make workarounds, they're going to come for you, and you're going to be begging for support from the far right, oddly enough. There will come, that fusion period will come, just like it came in the past. The various abused parties end up amalgamating together to some degree. They begin ignoring one another, and they don't debate each other. They fight against the central problem of abuse. Now, every time the government or whatever social groups are involved, they try to prevent that from happening. They're never successful, so the paradigm collapses. That's what'll happen. People who right now are dyeing their hair pink and saying kill all men are going to be marching alongside white identitarians in a few years. Trust me, just watch what happens, because they're going to get abused too, as the paradigm continues to shift. Because the private marketplace will try to walk the tightrope, as it always does. They'll try not to offend people too much. They'll try to straddle that really narrow line. And if they go just a little bit further to either side, they piss somebody off and they lose money. They lose support. That's not good for business. They don't want to do that. They've got to walk that very thin rope, but that rope keeps getting more and more thin until it disappears entirely. And then everyone's pissed off at them. When that happens, they go along with it. They try to see the paradigm shift. Then all of a sudden they'll become libertarian or something. They'll start espousing anarcho-capitalism or something like that. It'll be really funny to watch. Now, I'm optimistic in long-term tense about the future of the internet, about the future of people being able to say what they want, live their lives as they choose, to be left alone, getting rid of some of the worst aspects of authoritarianism. I'm optimistic long-term. Some people thought that I was being... some people thought with my original video I was just optimistic short and long-term. With my next one, they're like, oh, it's so scary, like he's really pessimistic. I'm both. Long-term optimism. I think the paradigm collapses, the censorship degrades, people start getting along, having debate again instead of trying to blacklist one another. Short-term, that won't happen. We're talking a span of a year, 2, maybe 3 years, maybe up to a half a decade that we have to wait until that happens. Until then, it stays dicey. But once they start going for the left, and once those further left elements begin basically making the same arguments that people on the so-called far right are making, that's when it begins to degrade. That's when it begins to go away. You can no longer use wedge issues because both of those fringes have actually pulled together as a dipole to standard culture. They begin designing the new culture. They will drive all edginess. They will drive all speech. They will drive all entrepreneurship. And that's where, trust me, if you're corrupt and you're only in it for the money, which some people are, I'm not going to indicate anyone in specific, but there are always people like that. It's hard to tell who's who. If you're like that, you should angle yourself to be part of that new dipole, because that's where all the success will be. The old establishment will crash, burn, and die. And if you actually believe in liberty, as I do, that's where you should be. If that means standing alongside someone who is essentially a Nazi, so be it. If it means standing alongside someone who's basically a communist, so be it. You're on the right side of history. You're arguing for liberty. That's the driver of all progress in the West. You can't have progress in the Western world. We don't have the kind of setup that the old world had. We need entrepreneurs and new ideas and discourse and debate and people to disagree in a noble manner with one another without, flinging, the threats around and blacklisting one another. We need that sort of thing to drive social and economic progress, especially online. The internet can't develop without that going on. It will stagnate. That would be a disaster for the Western economies. Look at what a proportion e-commerce now makes up. In a very short time period, we went from basically everything's brick and mortar to, hey, as a double-digit total is sold online. It's getting larger and larger to the point at which the old businesses are actively trying to tax that shit so they can slow its growth, so they can compete, so that they can become partially e-commercial as well. It's a huge, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars just in that e-commerce, not even just the tech firms themselves and all their various platforms and all the money being made. Hand over fist, and all the different people who never would have been well known 10 years ago at the internet, then all of a sudden they got millions of followers and they've got their podcast and they're getting offers from corporations or ad sponsorships. I've had business groups try to sponsor me. I reject it because I'm not comfortable with having anyone control my message, but they're there. And my content, now, like, I don't even have a tenth the crowd of some of these people. I don't even have a tenth as many people looking at my stuff as a lot of people that are online, and yet I'm getting all, I can't even imagine how many offers Molyneux gets. I can't even imagine how many offers Paul Joseph Watson gets, with or without InfoWars associated with his name. I can't even imagine it. Or the Young Turks or something like that, which is basically, you know, the fake alt media. Oh yeah, we're basically the online MSNBC, only with different people. But just trust us, you know, we've got your best interests in mind. I'll make tens of millions of dollars. I've got your best interests in mind. I know what it's like to be one of you, okay? I think you forgot, as far as Jenk goes. But that's the way that the cookie crumbles. Yeah, censorship is always bad. The left wouldn't have anything in common with the left counterculture of the 60s. They wouldn't even really have that much in common with the really boring, like, Mondale liberals of the 80s and the 90s. Not much, I mean, they were never arguing for that sort of stuff. The only lockstep they had with, like, the Reaganites was censorship, like, as far as music was concerned or something. Just had a chat with H.A. Goodman. And if you haven't checked it out, you should. On the topic of censorship, he makes a very good point about music. And that's where you can go easily a step too far. When you start cracking down on musicians, all those left-leaning musicians, all of a sudden, they're not going to be so liberal anymore. They're going to sound like a bunch of monarchists and say, oh, how dare the government censor us. Creative control, you know, other than the ones that just have ghostwriters. Like, there's one Swedish dude who writes, like, every other hit that's ever on the radio, apparently, and it's really surreal because he's writing for people across the board. And he's like some random Swedish dude nobody's ever heard of. But, I mean, that doesn't take much talent. He's writing, like, Bieber songs or something. That's not talent. But the truly talented musicians, they're gonna be kind of upset. Rock and roll is not dead yet. It's still got some life left in it, and it's gonna revive a lot faster. You're gonna see a return to Cold War era sort of maybe new wave of British heavy metal stuff if they keep going in the direction they're going now. See, like Land of Confusion, you're gonna see the Muppets come back in music videos or something. That'll be funny. Although you saw that kind of with Radioactive by Imagine Dragons. They have like a teddy bear, like teddy bears fighting and stuff. That's kind of Muppet-like. Maybe it already happened. Oh no, they're coming after the music next. Big mistake. Everybody loves music. That's about all. Peace out.